Welcome to the show. If you have been paying attention to the global charts or the business headlines recently, you know exactly what is happening in the music industry right now in early 2026.
Yeah, the atmosphere is completely unprecedented.
It really is. We are looking at the official return of the South Korean group BTS. As of June 2025, every single member completed their mandatory military service. And now we are sitting just a few weeks away from the release of their first full group album in years, which is titled Orang.
Right. It is a definitive moment for the industry as a whole. The album is scheduled to drop on March 20, 2026. But if we look at the logistics, this is much larger than just a record release. The infrastructure being mobilized here is massive.
Staggering, really.
Exactly. They have announced a world tour that will run through 2026 and 2027. And if you look at the financial analyst projections, they are estimating revenues that exceed $1 billion when you combine the tour and the album sales.
That figure $1 billion is the kind of revenue usually reserved for the GDP of small nations, not a musical act. It forces us to ask a very specific question. How exactly did we get here?
Well, it is a complex trajectory.
I mean, we are analyzing a group that started in a garage studio in Seoul in 2010, essentially handing out flyers on the street to get people to listen to them, and now they are a billion-dollar economic engine. I want to trace that entire evolution today for you, our listener.
To understand the mechanics of that rise, we really have to look past the surface level of, catchy hooks or choreography.
Yeah.
We need to analyze their cultural impact, their function as a soft power asset for South Korea, and the evolution of their artistry.
They transitioned from being hip-hop underdogs to what the media eventually dubbed the princes of pop.
Right. And to cover this, we are pulling from a wide variety of sources today. We are looking at their discography records, the financial reports from their agency, the literary references embedded in their lyrics, and the historical timelines of both their achievements and their military service.
Let us start at the very beginning. To really grasp the significance of this 2026 comeback, we have to go back 16 years, back to 2010.
The landscape of the Korean music industry was fundamentally different back then.
It was dominated by a few major players, correct?
Yes, it was essentially an oligopoly controlled by the big three agencies, which were SM, YG, and JYP. The formation of BTS began with Bang Si-hyuk, the CEO of Big Hit Entertainment. It's crucial to understand that Big Hit was a very small, struggling agency at the time.
So they did not have the capital of the big players.
Not at all. And Bang Si-hyuk's initial vision was not to create a pop idol group in the traditional sense. He originally wanted to form a strict hip-hop unit centered around a specific underground rapper he had found in the Seoul scene.
That would be Kim Namjoon, who goes by the name RM.
Exactly. The original plan was a hip-hop crew. However, the global market context forced a pivot. In 2010, physical album sales were crashing worldwide due to piracy and the shift to digital.
And streaming revenue had not quite matured enough to replace that lost income yet.
Right. So Bang Si-hyuk realized that a pure hip-hop group might not survive financially. He needed a business model that could generate sustainable revenue. That meant adopting the idol model.
Which means leveraging live performances, merchandise sales, and building a highly dedicated fandom. But that sounds like a massive contradiction.
It was a huge contradiction.
You have hip-hop, which prizes authenticity and self-expression, and then you have the idol industry, which is often analyzed as being highly regimented and manufactured. How do you reconcile those two things without alienating both sets of audiences?
That was a primary conflict during their formation. Bang Si-hyuk decided to attempt a hybrid approach. He wanted the commercial viability of an idol group, but the artistic integrity of a hip-hop troupe.
Meaning he wanted them to perform like idols, but write their own material.
Yes, to write their own lyrics and express their own thoughts like rappers. This was an incredibly risky strategy. In fact, the sources note that many potential trainees left the project specifically because they refused to be part of an idol group.
But RM, Suga, and J-Hope stayed on.
They did. They became the foundational rap line of the group.
And then the agency added the vocalists to round out the commercial appeal. That brought in Jin, Jungkook, V, and Jimin.
Correct. So now you have the 7 members. And the preparation process was intense, even by the notoriously strict Korean industry standards. They lived together in a single cramped room in a small dormitory.
The sources mention they practiced for nearly 15 hours a day leading up to their debut.
Up to 15 hours, yes. But it was not just dance rehearsal. Bang Si-hyuk placed a heavy emphasis on education in the hip-hop genre. They studied the history of the music.
They wanted to ensure they respected the culture they were participating in.
Exactly. If you look at their early track hip-hop file, they reference their influences directly. They name-drop Epic High, Jay-Z, Eminem, Nas, and CL Smooth. They were consciously trying to prove their legitimacy.
Let us examine their actual debut in 2013. They released the single album To Cool for School with the lead track No More Dream. Looking at it from our perspective now in 2026, the sound of that track is very heavy.
It is very aggressive. They utilized a sound reminiscent of 1990s West Coast hip-hop. But the lyrical content is what really requires analysis here. No More Dream was a direct, pointed critique of the South Korean education system.
It criticized the immense pressure placed on students to study relentlessly, secure a safe corporate job, and suppress their own individual desires.
Right. It was a song about the anxiety of having no dream of your own because society has already dictated your entire path for you.
You mentioned earlier that they were from a very small agency. Did a message that heavy land immediately with the public?
Commercially speaking, no.
Yeah.
It was not a smash hit right out of the gate. They sold a modest number of physical copies. However, the message itself struck a nerve with the youth demographic.
Because they were tackling subjects that were generally avoided.
Exactly. Kathy Sprinkle, who authored a comprehensive biography on the group, noted that this debut sent shockwaves through the industry ranks, precisely because they were tackling taboos. In a conservative society, openly criticizing the education system or parental expectations is a significant risk.
This debut kicked off what is known as the School Trilogy.
Yes, which included Too Cool for School, the extended play ORUL 8, and School Live Affair.
So the School Trilogy was essentially their initial rebel phase. They were positioning themselves as the voice of frustrated students.
Precisely. And the second entry really doubled down on that theme. Scholar Kung Hyun Kim has analyzed these early works extensively. He notes that they were expressions of Han.
Han being a uniquely Korean concept, correct?
Yes, it is a concept of deep-seated sorrow, resentment, or frustration. But in BTS's case, it was filtered through teenage angst. They were rebels, but they were also distinct underdogs. They were struggling to even get airtime on major broadcasting networks because they did not have the financial backing or the connections of a large agency.
I think people looking at them today forget how precarious their situation was in those early years. We see the billion-dollar tour numbers now, but in 2014, the financial picture was bleak.
It is a stark contrast to today. In July 2014, they traveled to the United States to film a reality show and perform. They held a free concert at a small venue called the Troubadour in West Hollywood.
They were literally walking down Hollywood Boulevard, handing out flyers to passing strangers.
They were. They were asking tourists to come to their show for free. That visual, these future global icons begging people to listen to their music, is a crucial element of their overall narrative.
It grounds their story. It proves they did not just appear at the top of the industry overnight.
Absolutely. They released their first full-length studio album, Dark and Wild, later in 2014. It performed decently, reaching #2 on the South Korean charts, but the agency was still financially unstable. Their Red Bullet tour attracted about 80,000 spectators across 18 cities globally.
Which is a solid start, but they were still fighting for basic survival in an incredibly saturated market.
Right, and the major pivot point seems to occur in 2015. This is when they intentionally moved away from the aggressive school rebel image and entered what is known as the youth era.
This brings us to the most beautiful moment in life series, or in Korean, Hwayangyonwa. This marked a massive shift in both their tone and their visual aesthetics.
Hwayangyonwa. It is a very poetic phrase.
What is the specific conceptual implication of that title?
It roughly translates to the most beautiful moment in life, specifically referring to the prime of youth. But the group's interpretation of that concept was highly complex. They argued that youth is beautiful, certainly, but it is simultaneously the most anxious and uncertain time in a person's life.
And their musical style evolved to match that complexity.
Yes, they softened the hard hip-hop edge and began to heavily incorporate electro-pop and R&B elements. The track I Need You is the key milestone here. That song earned them their first ever music show win in South Korea.
And the track Dope followed shortly after that. That was the song that really began to travel internationally online.
Dope was a massive breakout moment on YouTube. The music video garnered over 100 million views, which was a very high benchmark for a K-pop group at that time. It also reached #3 on the Billboard World Digital Song Sales chart.
The sources indicate that the Most Beautiful Moment in Life series really deepened their connection with their fans.
It did, because the storytelling became much more vulnerable. They were no longer just angry at the institutional systems. They were openly admitting to feeling lonely, depressed, and entirely unsure of their futures.
This vulnerability seems to be the exact point where their literary and philosophical influences start to become highly apparent. By 2016, with the release of the album Wings, they were building entire artistic concepts around classic literature.
Wings is considered a conceptual masterpiece by many critics. It was heavily inspired by Hermann Hesse's 1919 novel, Demian.
That is a German coming-of-age story, right? Dealing with Gnostic dualism.
Exactly. It explores the world of light versus the world of darkness. The album meticulously traces the loss of innocence and the direct confrontation with temptation.
Which is incredibly high concept for a pop group. Most mainstream acts are focusing on club anthems or straightforward romance. Here they are referencing early 20th century German literature.
It clearly signaled to the industry that they viewed their work as high art, not just a disposable commercial product. In the music video for the lead single Blood, Sweat, and Tears, you see explicit visual references to the myth of the fall of Icarus.
And the concept films for the album included direct quotes from Friedrich Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra.
Yes. They were actively engaging with complex philosophy.
And they did not shy away from addressing real-world social tragedy either. The song Spring Day comes from this specific period, released in early 2017.
Spring Day is an essential piece of their discography. It was released on the repackaged version of the album, titled You Never Walk Alone. Now, while the group has never explicitly confirmed this, likely to avoid severe political backlash, it is widely acknowledged by cultural critics and the Korean public as a tribute to the victims of the Sewol Ferry tragedy.
Where hundreds of high school students tragically drowned.
Yes, the lyrics speak deeply of longing, surviving a harsh winter, and waiting to meet someone again, and the visual imagery in the music video heavily reinforces that interpretation for many viewers.
The data on Spring Day shows incredible longevity. It stayed on the Korean streaming charts for years.
It is actually the longest charting song in the entire history of the major Korean streaming service Melon. It functioned as an anthem of public comfort. Commercially speaking, the Wings era was their domestic coronation. It became the best-selling album in the history of the Gaon chart at the time.
And it also made waves internationally. It cracked the Billboard 200 chart at number 26.
Which was the highest ranking for a K-pop album ever recorded at that point in history.
That structural success in 2016 perfectly set the stage for 2017, which really reads in the historical timeline as the year they shattered the Western market barrier.
2017 was the definitive tipping point. The primary catalyst was the Billboard Music Awards in May of that year. BTS received a nomination for Top Social Artist.
That specific category had been completely dominated by Justin Bieber for years prior.
Bieber had won it 6 years in a row. It was widely considered to be his dedicated award. But the BTS fandom, known collectively as RRE, mobilized on a massive scale.
They cast over 300 million votes on social media platforms.
Over 300 million, yes. When BTS won that award, the Western music industry was abruptly forced to pay attention. Executives realized this was not some localized niche interest. It was a highly organized, massive global movement.
Let us examine the mechanics of that fandom for a moment. AIR-MI stands for Adorable Representative MC for Youth. The name might sound lighthearted, but their structural organization is incredibly sophisticated.
It operates as a highly decentralized digital mobilization force. They organize global streaming parties to maximize chart impact. They systematically translated all of the group's content into dozens of languages so that the barriers to entry for new fans were virtually non-existent.
And they coordinated purchasing strategies specifically designed to impact regional music charts.
Precisely. Around the same time, in July 2017, the group also rebranded their English acronym. BTS originally stood for Bangtan Sonyeondan, which translates to Bulletproof Boy Scouts,
signifying their intent to block out the stereotypes and criticisms aimed at youth.
Right. But they announced the acronym would now also stand for Beyond the Scene, which symbolized youth who open the door and move forward toward their futures.
Which transitioned perfectly into the Love Yourself era. This series included the albums Her, Tear, and Answer, running from 2017 through 2018.
The Love Yourself series is structured as a complete narrative arc. It meticulously traces the psychological progression of love. It begins with the initial excitement and bright facade of falling in love in the album Her.
Then it pivots.
Yes, in the album Tear, it directly confronts the deep pain of separation. It explores the realization that the love was ultimately fake because the individual lost their true self in the process of trying to please the other person.
And then it resolves in the final compilation album.
Exactly. In answer, the thematic conclusion is that loving oneself is the absolute prerequisite for engaging in true love with anyone else. The sources show this narrative structure was heavily influenced by Erich Fromm's psychoanalytical book, The Art of Loving.
Again, we see them grounding mainstream pop music in complex psychological and philosophical texts.
It gave their music a significant thematic weight. And Love Yourself. Tear marked a historic commercial moment. It became the very first K-pop album to hit #1 on the Billboard 200 chart.
Following that achievement, they became the first Korean act to hold a stadium concert in the United States.
They sold out Citi Field in New York in a matter of minutes.
They also took that core message of self-love beyond the music industry. They brought it to the United Nations.
They formed a formal partnership with UNICEF for the Love Myself campaign, which was designed to end violence against children and teenagers globally. In September 2018, RM delivered a highly publicized speech at the United Nations General Assembly.
He spoke quite candidly about his own childhood, his past mistakes, and the critical importance of self-acceptance.
He urged young people around the world to speak yourself, regardless of their origin, skin color, or gender identity. That moment solidified their status as genuine global cultural icons, not just successful musicians.
Moving into 2020, they are arguably the biggest musical group on the planet. They released the album Map of the Soul.
Released in February 2020, Map of the Soul. 7 was an intense exploration of their own psyche. It was directly structured around Carl Jung's psychological theories regarding the persona, the shadow, and the ego.
The lead single from that era, Black Swan, was highly artistic.
It was released alongside a stunning art film featuring the MN Dance Company. The track was dark, introspective, and dealt with an artist's fear of losing their passion for their craft. The album itself sold over 4 million copies in South Korea almost instantly. They were fully prepped to launch the biggest global stadium tour of their entire careers.
And then the global pandemic happened. Everything ground to an absolute halt.
The massive world tour was abruptly canceled. It was a significant financial blow to the agency and a deep emotional blow to the group and their fans. But this crisis forced a strategic pivot that actually expanded their global reach even further. In August 2020, they released the single Dynamite.
This is a crucial data point because Dynamite was their first fully English track.
Yes. Prior to this, they had stuck primarily to Korean lyrics, utilizing English mostly for hooks or specific phrases. Dynamite was a deliberate strategic shift. It was a bright, energetic, disco-pop track.
Designed specifically to lift the public spirits during the harsh global lockdowns.
Exactly, and it debuted at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart, making them the very first all-South Korean act to achieve that specific milestone.
The cultural saturation of that song was inescapable. You heard it on mainstream radio and commercial broadcasts everywhere.
They quickly followed it up with the album B in late 2020. This was framed as their quarantine album. Unlike the highly polished retro-pop sound of Dynamite, B was much mellower. It focused entirely on offering comfort regarding the new reality of pandemic life.
The title track, Life Goes On, also hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, which is arguably an even more historic achievement.
It is, because Life Goes On is a predominantly Korean language song.
So they successfully proved they could dominate the Western charts with an English pop anthem, and then immediately turned around and proved they could achieve the exact same feat with a Korean language ballad.
Precisely. They maintained this incredible momentum straight through 2021. They released Butter, another English track, which held the #1 spot on the Hot 100 for multiple weeks. Then came Permission to Dance.
They also collaborated with the British rock band Coldplay on the track My Universe, which also topped the global charts.
And this era also brought them their first Grammy nominations, making them the first Korean pop act to receive that recognition, although the sources note they did not secure a win at the time.
We really need to discuss the economic data here. We mentioned the billion-dollar tour projection for 2026 earlier, but they were already generating massive, verifiable value for South Korea years before that.
The data is striking. In 2021, the Bank of Korea released financial figures estimating that BTS contributed approximately $5 billion annually to the South Korean economy.
$5 billion a year. To put that in perspective, that is comparable to the economic contribution of some mid-sized national corporations.
It is entirely unprecedented for an entertainment act.
What exactly drives that specific number? Merchandise sales.
Merchandise is a factor, but economists refer to it as the ripple effect. It includes massive exports of related consumer goods, from cosmetics to fashion. It includes tourism. Pre-pandemic data estimated that around 800,000 tourists visited South Korea annually, specifically because of their interest in BTS.
And it also drove a measurable surge in global interest regarding the Korean language.
Yes, language institutes and university programs around the world saw massive, documented spikes in enrollment numbers.
This operates as the textbook definition of soft power.
The political scientist Joseph Nye defined soft power as the ability to attract and co-opt rather than coerce. BTS became South Korea's most highly effective diplomats.
The government clearly recognized this.
They did. President Moon Jae-in officially appointed them as special presidential envoys for future generations and culture. In May 2022, their diplomatic influence reached the White House. They were invited to meet with President Joe Biden to formally discuss the rise in anti-Asian hate crimes.
They were operating effectively at the highest possible levels of international diplomacy. But then, just weeks later in June 2022, the momentum appeared to hit a wall, or at least that is how the global markets reacted.
On June 14, 2022, the group released a pre-recorded dinner video celebrating their 9th anniversary. During that specific broadcast, they announced a temporary suspension of their group activities.
They expressed that they were creatively burned out and needed time to focus on individual growth.
Yes. And of course, the looming, unavoidable issue of mandatory military service was heavily present in the subtext of that decision.
The financial market panicked immediately.
Hybe Corporation, which is the parent company of their agency, saw its stock value plummet by $1.7 billion the very next day.
$1.7 billion erased in a single trading session.
That severe drop perfectly illustrates the sheer financial weight resting entirely on the shoulders of those 7 individuals.
The agency had to scramble to clarify that the group was not permanently disbanding.
They released multiple statements, making it very clear that this was merely a pause, not a disbandment. They released an anthology album called Proof to formally close out the first major chapter of their career, and then the enlistment process began.
Under South Korean law, all able-bodied men are required to serve in the military for approximately 18 to 21 months.
Right. Let us examine how they systematically handled that required hiatus, because it was definitely not a period of total silence.
Jin, being the oldest member, enlisted first in December 2022.
Followed by J-Hope in April 2023. Suga, who had a documented history of a severe shoulder injury, enlisted as a social service agent rather than active duty in September 2023.
And then the remaining 4 members enlisted together.
Yes, RM, V, Jimin, and Jungkook all enlisted in December 2023. But critically, before they left, they executed a highly coordinated rollout of solo projects.
They each released individual studio albums.
And those albums performed exceptionally well. Jungkook's pop-focused album Golden was a massive global hit. Jimin's Face, V's Layover, RM's Indigo, they all charted internationally. They successfully kept the brand highly visible and profitable even while the core group was structurally inactive.
Which brings us to the timeline of a return.
The discharges happened sequentially. Jin was officially discharged on June 12, 2024. J-Hope followed on October 17, 2024. And finally, in June 2025, the remaining 5 members completed their service.
In the K-pop industry, there has long been this concept of the military curse, the idea that a boy band inevitably loses its momentum and relevance after taking that mandatory break.
The data shows BTS effectively broke that curse entirely.
Which brings us directly to today in early 2026, the full reunion.
They held their first public group live stream on July 2025, formally confirming the start of their new era. By November 2025, Jimin confirmed during an interview that the vocal recordings for the new album were completely finished.
And on January 1st, 2026, they officially announced Arirang,
which is an incredibly loaded title.
Why did they choose that specific title? What does Arirang signify to the Korean public?
Arirang is an ancient, traditional Korean folk song. It is widely considered by many to be the unofficial national anthem of the country. Thematically, it is a song about deep separation, eventual reunion, and the arduous journey of crossing a difficult mountain pass.
So by choosing this specific title for their comeback album, they are sending a very clear message.
They are signaling a definitive return to their cultural roots. They were not trying to position themselves strictly as Americanized pop stars. They are firmly asserting their identity as Korean artists who have successfully crossed the metaphorical mountains of mandatory military service and unprecedented global fame and have now returned home.
And the global tour dates dropped shortly after that announcement.
On January 13, 2026, they announced the 2026-2027 World Tour. As we noted at the beginning of our discussion, the revenue projections are sitting at over $1 billion.
It places them in the rarefied air of the biggest touring acts in the history of live music.
It is a remarkable historical timeline. From handing out promotional flyers to disinterested tourists in West Hollywood, to generating billions of dollars for their national economy and speaking at the United Nations.
It truly is a narrative of intense resilience. They successfully navigated the severe structural disadvantages of originating from a small agency. They overcame significant language barriers and documented instances of industry racism. They adapted to a global pandemic, and they completed their mandatory military service.
And through all of those phases, if you analyze their discography, they maintained a remarkably consistent core message. They consistently focused on speaking for the underdog and providing a voice for the anxieties of the youth generation.
Looking at the data and the current market conditions, what should the industry expect from this new era?
Based on the thematic choices we are seeing, I think the market will see a group that is significantly more mature and far less concerned with actively chasing current pop trends. They essentially have nothing left to prove commercially.
They have secured their legacy.
Exactly. The choice of Airang suggests they are looking inward, examining their heritage in order to move forward artistically. Industry analysts are now regularly comparing their structural longevity and cultural impact to legacy groups like the Beatles or U2, rather than comparing them to their current pop contemporaries.
They have returned, and it is clear the entire global market is paying close attention. It really forces you to consider what this level of sustained, dominant success means for the structural future of the entire global music industry moving forward. We will certainly be analyzing the album closely when it drops in March. Thanks for listening.